Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. In today's episode, I speak with Shawna Bruce. Shawna is an expert when it comes to crisis communications, public relations, and really the whole issue of communications around disasters. In this episode, I'm talking to her about the need for mindful communication, what that means and how that can actually help leaders motivate and get action that is really difficult during the time of the disaster. So stay tuned. Hey, Shawna, good to see you. How are you today?
It's great to see you, Leanne. We're doing really well. How are you managing with this whole health and mental health crisis?
Well, just like everyone else, it's been a big adjustment, but everybody's going through it. So we just got to look at the bright side and get through it as best we can.
And we
One
will
of the
get
things,
through it.
yeah. One of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, I know your background is in crisis communications, public relations. You work with a lot of teams on preparing them for disasters and recovery response. I wanted to talk to you specifically about right now the role of communication because I'm seeing good and bad, and I really wanted to talk about mindfulness and communication. So, maybe give me your perspective on what you're seeing and some of the challenges you're currently seeing.
Well, you've known me for a while now, and my mantra has always been about communications is so critical in a crisis. And I've always felt that we do minimal amounts of work in some cases to prepare communicators to respond in a crisis scenario. But I will never have a better example of when communications has been so integral than this pandemic, because the actions that we're wanting people to take and the behaviors we're asking them to adopt are all being supported by communications through those leaders who are sharing that messaging. So I have to applaud all the communications teams out there at every level: municipal, federal, provincial, in organizations, hospitals, health. All of them have been doing this amazing job to get communications out there. But you're right, not every leader is a great communicator. And I would say to you that not every leader is mindful about the words they choose in their messaging and communications for their audiences. And that can be a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing I want to explore a bit with you is that whole mindfulness, because I think right now there's a real environment of fear, of uncertainty. And so as a leader who is trying to motivate change or mobilize an action, if you're feeding into that fear and anxiety, I'm not so sure that that's the best approach to take, because it might, while fear may motivate some people, it actually could paralyze other people. And so I'm just curious, say you're a mayor or someone in a public role. What would some tips you would give them as to trying to be more mindful in the messaging they're giving out to their residents and their businesses?
Well, I think we have to, first of all, how many times have we all used this word unprecedented? But it is truly an unprecedented situation. So I feel that as prepared as many people could be, nobody was prepared for this, right? Like, we're all in this together, and we are going to get through this together and be stronger because of it. So when I think about that, I want to share a quote that Tom Sampson, actually, the emergency management, the leader for Calgary's emergency management agency, he kind of put it together. He said, we're dealing with a health pandemic and a mental health crisis and an economic disaster, he said, and he called it this disaster triad. And I don't think we've ever had a situation where we have had mental health as part of our crisis. We certainly in disaster and emergency management address mental health concerns and anxiety, but it's almost always been about our teams in the response phase or the first responders. And we certainly share that on a community level, but never to the degree that we've seen this messaging go out there. So I think, first of all, leaders and mayors need to be cognizant of what they're managing. This isn't a regular disaster or emergency. This is a disaster triad that's covering off the pandemic, mental health, and that idea of the economic downturn or impacts that we're still waiting to see what's going to happen. So that would be number one. Know what you're dealing with and understand what you're dealing with. I think there's four things in a crisis that we need to be seeing from our leadership, and that is that consistency. We need consistent messaging coming out. We can't have miscommunication or misunderstandings. We need everyone to be consistent in how they're delivering that message. And if there's new information, to share those updates as promptly and timely as they can. We need them to be mindful. And we're going to talk a bit about mindful communications, but be aware of how your audience is feeling and the emotions involved there when you're delivering those key messages or those messages out there. Be relevant. Share stuff that's relevant to them. I loved something I saw in the media. The Montreal Gazette this week had an article, and at the bottom of the article, they talked about this omnipresent cyclone of news, in the sense that we know there's a lot of news out there. And we are working hard to kind of triage it for you. So we're going to post stuff here in this link that's applicable to our region of Montreal and Quebec as a province. Here's where all the other stuff is. And I thought, right on, that's great, because I've even had to take a bit of a media diet on that space. And the last thing I would say is to be you, like to be genuine. In the time of crisis isn't the time to adopt a new persona of someone you think you should be. Be yourself. I mean, we've seen this with Dr. Hinshaw. I mean, I've never met the woman, but she is someone you could take for coffee and have a chat with. She's genuine in the way she shares information. So I would say be consistent in your messaging, be mindful of how you're choosing your words, be relevant in the information you're sharing, and be yourself.
I think that's awesome advice. And I think so often, you're right, people get in a position where, whether they're comfortable being a spokesperson or not, they get in an environment and they have to, it's like sometimes adopt this, like you said, a persona that I got to know everything and I got to be the expert and I got to look professional. But at the same time, it's like, when you're authentic and genuine and people pick that up, you're probably more powerful in your messaging.
And people are emotional right now, you know. Their routines have been altered. Their vacations have been canceled. Heck, they may not even gotten home from their vacation on the route that they planned to. People can't see their family and friends. If you live in Alberta, you've had snow since October, and the weather's getting nicer and everyone's just itching to get out to the parks or take a nice walk. And they're worried about paying their rent and their mortgages and maybe losing their jobs. There's a lot of worry and anxiety out there. And so when you have a spokesperson that stands up and says, I know how you're feeling, you know what? In some cases they may, but in most cases, those people are still employed and they still have a steady job, and they kind of are not in the same situation as everyone in the audience. So you need to be addressing with some empathy there. You know, there's this, if I may, there's this quote from this chief neuroscientist that I picked up last week that talked about, he says, we all think of ourselves as being rational, and we occasionally are emotional, but modern neuroscientist tells us that we're all actually really emotional beings who are occasionally rational. So when you're communicating, you have to be leading with that compassion and empathy. It's more critical than ever than now, because people aren't making rational decisions. They're making emotional decisions.
I think that's brilliant, because you're right. I mean, people who are leading with their hearts right now are probably being more effective than those leading with their heads. You know, it's just true.
Well, and it's true. Like we talk, I don't know where this quote came from. I've seen it from a few places, so I can't attribute it. But they talk about the brain being a pinball machine, right? Messages go in, and sometimes they hit the right places and they trigger the preferred response or that action or behavior we want them to take. Like in this case, washing your hands, social distance, you know, coughing in your elbow, social distancing. But sometimes it hits the wrong spots, and people feel alienated, or they reject the messaging because they're like, yeah, no, I don't know about that. And other times you just lose the ball altogether and you have to start all over again, which I kind of chuckled when I read that, because I think, how many conversations do we have with our partners and we think, oh yeah, you're just not getting what I'm putting out here. Like, you don't understand at all what I'm saying here. So if you think of your brain in that context, that's why consistency of messaging and sharing the same messaging. And people say, well, I don't know what else to share. I've talked about washing your hands. Consistency. We need to see that message 7, 8, 9 times before we're making a change or a behavior, right? And use imagery that evokes the change you want them to make. it's interesting. I see a lot of the germs out there, like, and I get that for using that for this is a COVID update, because now the germ has become synonymous, that image, if you know what I mean, with that. But if you want people to be washing their hands, put a photo of people washing their hands. If you want them to be social distancing, don't have a family gathering of them all together at a birthday party, right? So use the image that reflects the communications, because people, a picture's worth 1,000 words. So they remember that more than the words that you gave them.
Yeah. The last thing I want to just explore with you is around, say you have a business, you run a business. Any advice on how you should be communicating to your employees, your suppliers, those who are waiting for you to pay bills? Like, you know, honesty versus like what would you give for someone? Because I think businesses are under an extreme amount of stress right now, and so they're probably struggling with how much should I say or not say. How should I be delivering this message? You know, just any
Well,
advice?
I think when we talk about sort of mindful communications, this is where it works best, in those one-on-one or small group scenarios. You know, they talk about mindful communications being what that you're listening, that you're feeling, and how you're responding, right? So when you're mindful listening, you know, you need to actually be present in the moment and having the conversation. So a supplier, for example, you chose supplier, you know, and demonstrating that empathy, they may be talking to you about, you know, I've lost like 5 customers, blah, blah, blah. You can't be sitting back there thinking, well, you know, I'm one of those customers and I'm not gonna be able to do this either. And my business is going in the toilet, blah, blah, blah. You need to actually be demonstrating that you're open to what that other person is feeling. So that listening and kind of getting away of that unconscious bias or judgment that can come in. So those conversations for mindful communications, it is a little bit about more, you know, sharing that you understand, you know, you're trying to understand the position they're in, because maybe you really don't. Maybe you haven't lost as many customers as that individual, et cetera. So I think you have to be very careful not to say, oh, I know what you mean. Oh, I get it. Because every situation and every person's dilemma is unique to them. And they like to believe it's unique to them. So don't be trying to kind of play it down by saying, oh, I get it. Oh, I know. I've had 5 people today. I've had, you know, listen and be mindful of how you're listening and that you're paying attention to what they're saying to you. The second one is feeling. You know, you can share how you're feeling with your customers or your clients or your employees. They know that you are struggling to keep things going because it impacts them and their families, right? Acknowledging that is okay. Sharing that honesty, it's okay to say, I'm not sure how we're going to come out of this. I really don't want to lose on my employees. I am doing the best I can. I've applied for these loans. I'm making sure that you're all getting your 75%. I make sure, you know, sharing that information. Like, I have a sister-in-law who works for a major global company in cargo and her company, she's a senior director, and she's been asked, all of her team, to take a week of unpaid leave every month till they get through this, because they don't want to lose anyone. And I felt they were sharing how they felt. They were trying to act with kindness. They don't want anyone to lose their job, but this is the solution. But the other thing is, everyone came to the decision together. They involved people in those discussions to make those hard decisions. And that showed honesty and trust, and they were transparent. And the third thing is in that times of trust is like I said, be honest with them. Be sharing what you know, and just give yourself time to pause before you respond. You know, we almost always have an answer in our heads to respond when someone asks that question, right? Oh, I want to get this out. That's my message. In mindful communication, it's really more important what you're saying to me than what I'm sharing with you, which is key. So that listening, feeling, and being emotional, responding with the right words, and being mindful of how you choose those words. Like you say, don't heighten the anxiety or worry. Don't say it's a doomsday out there. We're all going to lose our jobs. I don't know what we're going to do. We'll all lose our homes. You know, you're in it together. And if you're a good business leader, you're looking for solutions for yourself as well as your team. Your employees are your most important asset. So finding solutions for them is just as important. That is going to be your solution for your business continuity there, I think.
That's awesome. Thank you very much, Shawna. Your perspective, your expertise, and insights are very important. And I think, I'm looking forward to having the video shared by others because I would love to see more mindful communication out there right now.
I think word selection, mindful communication, being open and transparent. And you know what? We need leaders to lead. People are looking at their employers to lead them through this and to be part of the solution. So we're all going to get through this, and we're all going to get through it together. Absolutely.
That's awesome. Well, thanks again, Shawna. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks, Leanne. Stay well and healthy.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.